I'm Efrem Graham, and this is CBN NewsWatch for Wednesday, September 29, 2021. Coming up, it is day 2 of hearings on the chaotic withdrawal from Afghanistan. See who is in the hot seat and what is being said. Plus, this could be the good news America is waiting for. The former head of the FDA believes the COVID outbreak is coming to an end.
I think that there are things we can do to prevent this kind of episode from ever happening again.
He also shares what our country has to do to stop the next pandemic, which could be coming soon. And actor Isaiah Washington reveals his role in the new film God's Not Dead, We the People.
I like to pick projects that make me feel like I am being of service.
See why he said yes to the part and how he looks for God's guidance in choosing all of his films. Those stories and more are ahead today on NewsWatch.
This is CBN NewsWatch.
We begin this half hour with the House Armed Services Committee holding its hearing on Afghanistan again today. Leading U.S. officials testifying on the chaotic withdrawal. Congressman Rogers pressed Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin on why some Americans were left behind despite President Biden's promise to get them out.
Mr. Secretary, the American public needs to know, did the clock run out or did you run out of capability? Did you at any point ask President Biden for any more time or more support to enable your forces to stay and complete the full evacuations of American citizens, not leaving them behind as promised? If so, what was the Biden response?
On the issue of evacuating American citizens and SIV holders or SIV applicants, this work continues on. We're not finished, and we'll make sure that we stay focused on this to get out every American citizen that wants to leave and has the right credentials to be able to leave. On the issue of the security at the airport, it was my assessment, and I remain convinced of this, that the risk to mission and risk to force was beyond significant. And had we stayed there much longer, we would have endured continued attacks by ISIS-K and potentially the Taliban.
The representatives asked Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, about his actions during the last days of the Trump administration, specifically concerning phone conversations with his Chinese counterpart. Milley told the committee it was his duty to assure the Chinese official the U.S. did not intend to launch a military attack. He maintained the call was appropriate and that Secretary of State Mike Pompeo and House Chief of Staff Mark Meadows knew about the call. Now, you can get more from the hearing this evening on Faith Nation. It begins at 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. At Tuesday's hearing, top military leaders testified they recommended the U.S. keep 2,500 troops in Afghanistan even after the August 31st withdrawal deadline. That's a direct contradiction to the president's statements last month. Charlene Aaron is on that part of the story.
The nation's leading generals faced tough questioning by lawmakers on Capitol Hill Tuesday, saying they believed U.S. forces should remain in Afghanistan and implying they communicated that advice to the president. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff testifying that he believed it necessary to maintain U.S. troop presence ahead of the withdrawal, offering a differing account from President Biden's statements.
My assessment was back in the fall of 20, and it remained consistent throughout, that we should keep a steady state of 2,500, and it could bounce up to 3,500, maybe something like that, in order to move toward a negotiated, gated solution.
Did you ever present that assessment personally to President Biden?
I don't discuss exactly what my conversations are with the sitting president in the Oval Office, but I can tell you what my personal opinion was, and I'm always candid.
General Frank McKenzie saying he had warned what would happen if we didn't leave 2,500 troops behind.
And my view is that 2,500 was an appropriate number to remain, and that if we went below that number, in fact, we would probably witness a collapse of the Afghan government and the Afghan military. So,
General McKenzie, may I just, I guess my question is, would it be fair for the committee to assume that both President Trump and President Biden received that specific information?
I believe it would be reasonable for the committee to assume that.
That contradicts President Biden's statements in an interview with ABC News last month.
No one told, your military advisors did not tell you, no, we should just keep 2,500 troops. It's been a stable situation for the last several years. We can do that. We can continue to do that.
No, no one said that to me that I can recall.
White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki pushed back against suggestions that the president misled the public on recommendations from his military advisors.
The president made clear that the advice was split. He didn't outline what every individual conveyed to him in private advice.
Michael O'Hanlon of the Brookings Institution weighed in on the issue on CBN's Faith Nation.
The central reality is we didn't have to lose Afghanistan in the first place. We didn't have to decide to leave in April. And Mr. Biden's team did not recommend that we depart when he made that decision back in the spring.
General Milley was also questioned about his calls with his counterpart in China during the final months of the Trump presidency in an effort to reassure China that President Trump and the U.S. were not planning any kind of attack.
I am certain that President Trump did not intend to attack the Chinese. And it is my directed responsibility, and it was my directed responsibility by the Secretary, to convey that intent to the Chinese.
He also said he reassured Speaker Nancy Pelosi that the president could not launch an attack on his own and went over protocols with his staff.
At no time was I attempting to change or influence the process, usurp authority, or insert myself in the chain of command.
Charlene Aaron, CBN News.
The huge battle in Congress continues between progressive Democrats on the left and more moderate Democrats. The two sides can't come together on the cost for the president's massive $3.5 trillion spending plan. So progressives say they will not support the bipartisan infrastructure bill.
I would vote no, and so would 50 others.
I think there's a lot of work needs to be done.
Republicans say the plan is bad for the economy and for jobs because of its big spending and high taxes, something many moderate Democrats also have problems with. Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen says President Joe Biden's spending proposals will address long overdue infrastructure needs. Yesterday, she asked Congress to support the Biden administration's $3.5 trillion Build Back Better plan, which expands the social safety net and focuses on climate change, even urging support for a $1 trillion bipartisan bill addressing traditional infrastructure needs like bridges and roads. She also made a call for Congress to raise the debt ceiling to avoid defaulting on its bills. She talked about the impact it could cause and says if the debt limit is not raised, the country would likely face a financial crisis and an economic recession. Here's a breakdown of what could happen if the debt ceiling is not raised. Millions of Americans would not receive Social Security or Medicare payments. No food assistance from SNAP's programs, no paycheck for some U.S. troops and federal employees. Monthly pay for veterans and pension payments would lapse. Child tax credit checks would be delayed, and the local government would not be able to access federal aid. I want to shift now to the fight against COVID. Pfizer has submitted its information to the FDA for review on vaccinations for children between the ages of 5 and 11. The vaccine could be available for children by Thanksgiving. Many have gotten seriously ill from COVID this year. There is some good news. COVID hospitalizations have begun to drop. Also, many people still leaving their jobs rather than complying with vaccine mandates. 39 resigning from a health system in Kansas City, and Novant Health in North Carolina firing 175 people for refusing to get the vaccine. In a few moments, we'll hear from a former head of the FDA on why he believes the COVID pandemic is coming to an end. Now I want to turn to some other stories we're following for you right now in the CBN newsroom. A volcano in La Palma, Spain continues to spew lava and ash. It has caused 500 buildings to be buried, including houses and schools. More than 6,000 people have been displaced. Thailand authorities are working to repair a levee and floodgate damaged by a reservoir overflowing. This was due to heavy rains from Tropical Storm Diamo. 4,000 households and farm areas are damaged as a result. At least 7 deaths have occurred due to the flooding. 1 person is reported missing. Rescue workers continue to evacuate residents in the area. Army troops are on standby to help distribute gasoline in the UK. This week, lines stretch for miles at gas stations as fuel shortage are affecting the area. This will be welcome news for the entire nation. The end of the pandemic. Former FDA Commissioner Dr. Scott Gottlieb believes it could happen soon. Medical reporter Lori Johnson spoke with him about why he believes that, whether we could face future pandemics and younger children being vaccinated.
About half of all U.S. children ages 12 and older have been vaccinated against COVID-19. Currently, the shots are not available for younger kids, but that's likely to change. Former FDA Commissioner Scott Gottlieb believes children 5 to 11 could be offered their shots between Halloween and Thanksgiving.
Now, the vaccine for kids aged 5 to 11 is basically the same formulation as the current vaccine, just in a lower dose.
An even lower dose will likely be offered to children ages 6 months to 4 early next year. When it comes to adults, Gottlieb says businesses should decide whether to require workers to get the jab, adding President Biden's vaccine mandate may not survive legal challenges.
A lot of businesses that were considering mandates now might wait because they're going to wait to see what the federal government does, and it's going to take the federal government months to implement this mandate if they're ever able to. And so you might have actually slowed down the rate of decision making in the private community.
He says businesses could consider natural immunity in lieu of vaccines.
I think we need to recognize that people who have immunity that's acquired through infection, that immunity is durable and it appears quite robust. I think the question from a clinical standpoint is how long it's going to last.
When it comes to the pandemic, Dr. Gottlieb has reason to believe the infamous Delta surge will be the last one. Then COVID-19 in the U.S. would transition to an endemic, where the virus becomes a seasonal pattern like the flu.
I think that this might be the last major wave of infection. The idea that this is going to continue to mutate very quickly and all these mutations are going to evade our tools and this is sort of going to be an endless crisis, I just don't see that.
However, he says the U.S. must take action to stop the next pandemic, perhaps the bird flu, which could be right around the corner.
And I think that there are things we can do to prevent this kind of episode from ever happening again.
In his new book, Uncontrolled Spread, Dr. Gottlieb recommends fixing mistakes such as not being able to quickly deploy large-scale diagnostic testing, which could have identified asymptomatic cases.
You know, you'd see a situation where 30 people would be in a room, everyone would be fine, and then 25 people would get the infection. And so the assumption was there must have been a contaminated surface that 25 people came in contact with. But what actually was happening was there was someone who was asymptomatic in that setting who infected the other people.
The CDC, which usually takes months to collect, analyze, and disseminate information, found itself ill-prepared when it came to the need for speed.
And then when they issued guidance to try to advise us on how we should be taking steps to reduce our individual risk and how businesses should be taking steps to reduce their risk, the guidances often weren't very well informed. They weren't articulated in a way that they could be actionable by consumers.
Then came the inability to manufacture first-line-of-defense drugs, such as antibody treatments.
We really didn't have the adequate manufacturing capacity we need to be able to prepare those at the scale that was required. And even now we have shortages of those drugs. They're starting to be rationed again.
And finally, the U.S. trusted other countries to admit the emergence of new diseases within their borders.
And we've seen time and again, in a time of crisis, countries don't share information, and we've been fooled many times.
Dr. Gottlieb says U.S. intelligence agencies like the CIA and the NSA should expand their missions to include surveillance of suspicious foreign outbreaks. Lori Johnson, CBN News.
And you can see Lori's full interview with Dr. Gottlieb on healthy living. You can find it on the CBN News Channel or the CBN News app, as well as our website, cbnnews.com. Still ahead, the much-anticipated movie God's Not Dead, We the People includes actor Isaiah Washington. Find out why he took the role in the movie and what he learned from it when we come back. God's Not Dead, We the People is the latest chapter in the popular Christian movie franchise, and it's only in theaters for 3 nights next week. I caught up with one of the stars, Isaiah Washington, to learn more about why he came to play a congressman in the film and how he looks to God for guidance in the roles he takes.
Freedom is a fragile thing, and it's never more than one generation away from extinction.
What made you say yes to the God's Not Dead franchise?
Have never known it again.
Let's face it, your God, your book, they're in the way.
I like to pick projects that make me feel like I am being of service.
Started because one man chose a hill he was willing to die on. I would like to call this hearing of the House Subcommittee to order.
Right now, there's an effort underway to mandate universal educational guidelines.
How much alike, I should say, are you to the congressman you portray in God's Not Dead, We the People? How much are you like Daryl?
There are attributes there that obviously you have to bring to the table. In the world that I'm in, I have to use my facilities, mental facilities, body, voice to create something that was just really a blank page, and then someone wrote it. It's always interesting that people say, "Oh man, you were so believable. You were so this, you were so that." And I always say, "Yeah, but I didn't write it. I just merely used my body as an instrument to play the song." And the song that Daryl Smith, the lyrics, so to speak, resonated with me.
Once we decide what a child needs to know, it becomes imperative that every child know it.
Remember the visit we got from social services the other day?
I'm here to review your homeschooling environment.
Religion has been removed from our schools. They're teaching kids that they don't need God.
I was overwhelmed and blown away with how many people were actually homeschooling their children long before the pandemic, and the issues that arise because of that. And me being a father of a 22-year-old, a 19-year-old, and now 16-year-old, and being blessed and fortunate enough to have had them in public schools since they were in nursery, I felt that it was my duty to be able to speak on behalf of those who probably would never have a platform to talk about their challenges and their issues.
If your children do not show up at school a week from Monday, you will be charged with contempt of court, meaning you will be incarcerated.
Do you feel that what you do is your calling? You were called to do what you're doing today?
Oh, absolutely, 100%.
Just want to make sure you understand what you're fighting here.
Our district teaches a revisionist version of history.
If God is for us, who can be against us?
Around here, just about everyone else.
Did you on purpose tie yourself to a faith-based project?
I actually knew nothing about David A.R. White before.
Wow.
I was reached out to a gentleman, and oh God, please forgive me, sir, but I forget his name, and suggested that I reach out to the casting director. At that time, we were in the throes of the shutdown. So the offer didn't come in, and then it came back again, and then it became very real, and then the casting, then the offer, and then I got a chance to read the script, the character, and the entire story. I tried very hard to pick projects that will resonate with individuals for a long time after they've seen it, and money is not everything to me, it never has been. I've always been aware that, my children eventually are going to reach the ages that they are now, and that people are going to judge me and scrutinize me and my legacy based on the kind of material that I have said yes to. I just prayed and said, look, God, if you put me in the place, in my purpose, where I'm supposed to be of service, I promise you with all of my DNA that I will try to be the best at that thing.
You are out of order, Mr. Hill. A government of the people, by the people, for the people.
God's Not Dead, We the People is in theaters for 3 nights next week. That's Monday, October 4th through Wednesday, October 6th. We've got more on the film on this evening's edition of Studio 5. We're also looking at a Broadway hit that's now a big screen movie and sharing new music from a former band leader who's embarking on a solo career. You can catch Studio 5 this evening at 8:30 Eastern Standard Time on the CBN News Channel and at any time on the CBN News app. Coming up, from scientific unbelief to heaven and back, one man's faith journey in a new series by Fox's Ainsley Earhardt. We'll be right back. Fox and Friends' Ainsley Earhardt has launched a new faith-based series called Beyond and Back, featuring stories from people who've experienced miracles and near-death experiences. The 5-part series debuts on Fox Nation begins with Proof of Heaven. It tells the story of Dr. Eben Alexander, a neurosurgeon who always knew science was the pathway to truth and didn't believe in heaven before a life-altering brush with death. Here's a sneak peek from the Fox Nation Facebook page.
I certainly believed in kind of that materialist or physicalist model. I knew what I could determine based on the brain and its kind of creation of consciousness.
A neurosurgeon driven by science who never believed in God or the afterlife until something happened out of nowhere.
His brain was very much not functioning correctly, and yet he was in a transmaterial environment.
I was in heaven and encountered that infinitely loving force of God.
I think that what happened to my dad was a miracle.
Alexander's view of the afterlife changed following a grave illness, as you saw in 2008, where he was only given a 2% chance of survival. His story and others make up the series, and you can check it out on Fox Nation's Facebook page or the website. You can also find more on the story at cbnnews.com. Time now for your Wednesday word, and today's word is love. Look to God, His word, and His actions. Love is at the heart of it all. He gives love and He requires love in return. Embrace that truth and act in love to all you encounter today and every day. I challenge you to do it, and I promise you, things will be different. That is a wrap for this edition of CBN NewsWatch. You can always find more of our programs on the CBN News Channel or online at cbnnews.com at any time. We'd love to know what you think about the stories you've seen here today. You can email us, newswatch@cbn.com. You can also reach out and touch us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We would love to hear from you. Make this a wonderful Wednesday. We'll see you right back here, same time tomorrow. Goodbye. God bless.